When Matt Brawley created Amphibia, he had to fight to have a protagonist who was flawed. He had to fight to have a protagonist who was not so initially ebullient and over the moon about the prospect of being transplanted to a magical fantasy world filled with giant talking frogs. Brawley talks about there being a specific model for the Disney female protagonist. She is upbeat, she is cheerful, she is nice and friendly, and she never lets herself be discouraged. She approaches every challenge as an opportunity, and she very rarely lets the smile drop from her face for too long. Her worst flaw is that she's clumsy, and that's not really a flaw, because it makes the character more endearing, it makes her more relatable. It conveys that she's not pretentious, she's not full of herself, she's just an ordinary adventure-loving girl, just like you, the loyal viewer. How many Disney movies can you think of that have a clumsy heroine? I was watching Encanto, an otherwise great movie that nonetheless features another one of these clumsy protagonists, Mirabelle. I'm thinking of Anna in Frozen, I'm thinking of Rapunzel in Tangled, I'm thinking of Ariel in The Little Mermaid, I'm thinking of a half dozen other major Disney female protagonists just in the last 30 years. These protagonists are differentiated from the archetypical Disney princess mold, mostly meaning Snow White, Cinderella, etc., by being clumsy and awkward instead of perfect and refined. But that's not really a subversion. It just makes her more accessible and more relatable. These aren't actual flaws or actual problems the character needs to deal with, or actual aspects of the character's personality that would risk endangering the audience's absolute sympathy for the character. Brawley said he wanted to do something a little different with Anne. She's not a bad person, or callous, or cold-hearted, and of the three main girls who get transported to Amphibia, she is the only one who is not hiding dark secrets by the end of Season 2. Nonetheless, she takes a lot longer to adapt to Amphibia than a lot of the suits Disney apparently wanted. She's obviously flawed at the beginning of the show. She's selfish, she's a little vain, she's lazy, she prefers to pass work off on to others instead of doing it herself. She does not look beyond her own individual enjoyment. She wants to do whatever she likes without looking at the consequences of that behavior, without looking at the bigger picture and how it affects her as a person and her relationships with others and the well-being of others. The version the suits wanted, Brawley was saying, he doesn't call them suits, he's quite respectful, but I'll call them suits. The version the suits wanted was closer to Marcy, someone who is unquestioningly brave and adventurous and a go-getter, someone who's passionate from the very start about landing in Amphibia and discovering all its secrets. Brawley says that his version is better for storytelling. I have mixed feelings about that kind of statement. One could argue reasonably that a protagonist who comes into Amphibia having idealized, romanticized notions about what they will encounter there, and then has those notions broken, or at least undermined to some degree, by the challenges and difficulties they encounter in this fantastical world, that would also offer a lot of conflict and a lot of potential for introspection on the part of the protagonist. In fact, The Owl House, Disney's other popular portal fantasy show, does exactly this with Luz Naceta. So it's not exactly theoretical, even if you're just looking at the very limited landscape of Disney animated shows being released today. If Marcy landed in Wardwood instead of Anne, and the show followed Marcy, she still would have encountered a lot of challenges and difficulties that would have tested her optimism and her usually unbreakable spirit. We would have seen Marcy's passion and enthusiasm be tested by negative consequences her actions might have. Think of a much longer and more comprehensive version of what happens in the episode New Wardwood. Still, I understand Brawley's pride at making Anne imperfect. I understand why he was willing to fight for her to not initially love Amphibia when she lands there. True, the story of her growing to love this dangerous, perilous, uncomfortable swamp world is somewhat predictable, but it's done well. Anne starts off as being quite irresponsible. She acts just out of her own personal desires and seeks only her own personal freedom without thinking about the larger community outside her, meaning both her little family of talking frogs and also the larger community of Wardwood. None of her flaws make her a callous person. None of her flaws lose her the sympathy of the audience or make her necessarily unlikable, a word that really needs to be stricken from the lexicon when talking about shows. Just my 2 cents. But they do mean that she has a lot of room to grow. She's your typical technology-obsessed, superficial, little myopic and self-centered California teenager. She does not understand even the struggles of her immigrant parents in adapting to a new country and integrating themselves into customs and values completely orthogonal to the ones they grew up in. And she certainly does not understand the outside world as a place beyond simply an opportunity for her to indulge her petty desires and caprices. Overcoming these flaws and becoming more willing to understand the dreams and passions and struggles of other people gives Season 1 a much-needed level of coherence and cohesion, even if the adventures she goes on in Season 1 are in of themselves quite disjointed and rather scattershot. Anne's journey, which includes her forming increasingly close relationships with her frog family, forms the backbone of Season 1. This is a backbone Season 3A does not really have, which is another reason why I have never really warmed to Season 3A, even by the standards of it just being a collection of fun, little lighthearted, cute, nice little adventures of the day. Season 3 swaps the roles of Anne and the Planters. It's based on Anne now being the one who has to help the planters acculturate to Earth. But this doesn't really make for compelling viewing for a number of reasons, at least to me. One of which being that Earth just is not as interesting to us, the viewers, as Amphibia, because Amphibia is this imaginative fantasy world, and suburban Los Angeles is not. But it goes a lot deeper than that. It's a lot more structural than just that. Anne survives the hardships of this world by learning to break out of her patterns of avoiding responsibility, indulging her petty caprices, and expecting everything to be done for her. She stops being so selfish and superficial. She starts examining things on a more comprehensive and interpersonal level. Season 3 doesn't really give us anything comparable. There's no real coherent arc or story or underlying narrative to the planters becoming more accustomed to Earth. Season 1 meanders, but at its core is a coherent and clearly defined story about a slightly selfish teenager learning to look outside her own little individual slice of experience and become more hardworking and more aware and more empathetic and more willing to help other people and not just herself. She must make choices for herself about what she wants her life to be, instead of simply having to be prodded by her parents to do simple chores or being influenced by her friends to do whatever they want. She is more self-possessed and she gains a level of self-respect, and this is tied to her helping others as well. It's not coincidental that on Earth she's an only child, while in Amphibia she has 2 younger siblings that she needs to protect and defend. She needs to look after their interests instead of simply caring about her own desires. Episodes like Best Franz and Girl Time see Anne be disingenuous with her friends / siblings, and they suffer because of that, so she learns not to act in such a selfish way in the future. This leads into Toad Tax, where she must make a definite choice between, as Dumbledore says, famously in Harry Potter, what is right and what is easy. And she chooses what is right, even as it puts herself in more immediate danger. She starts looking at the world outside her own individual wants and desires. An effective way to demonstrate character growth is to have a character make a choice that they otherwise would not have made before they underwent the character growth, and that is exactly what happens here. Anne, at the start of the show, would have run away from responsibility. She would have tried to pass the job of defending the planters off onto someone else, but instead, because she's grown more mature, because she's grown enough to look beyond her own little individual perspective, she stays and fights. It's a sign of respect for herself and respect for other people, the people who have cared for her and the people she's depended on. She realizes how important it really is for her to act selflessly, so she does. And it really marks a major difference in her character from the person we saw at the start of the show. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can and you want to see more videos like this. I'm really interested to see what they do with Anne's character growth in Season 3B. Despite all the growth I have mentioned in the video, she is still rather impulsive. She tends to look at people in the most negative light possible when they act in a way that does not conform with her ideas of who they are, she is very quick to accuse people of betraying her. And I'm not just talking about Sasha, I'm talking about even Hop Pop back in the earlier part of 2B. She's very rash. Anyway, tune in soon for our next analysis. Will be coming soon, promise you that. Thank you all again. Adios, comrades.